The right mentoring relationship can be a powerful tool for professional growth. It can lead to a new job, a promotion, or even a better work-life balance. But what does it take to be a great mentor or great mentee? And how do mentees find mentors to meet their career goals? Welcome to the School of Public Policy series for career and leadership success. Hi, I'm Whitney Sheridan, Director of Communications for the School of Public Policy at Penn State. Today, we'll be discussing the power of mentoring relationships with Catherine Baumgardner, our Director of Professional Development and Student Engagement. Hi, Catherine.
Great to join you today.
Also with us is our special guest, Penn State alumnus Jeremy Omard. Jeremy earned his bachelor's degree in Management Information Systems with a minor in Operations and Supply Chain Management. He's a managing consultant in the Managed Services and Cloud Solutions practice of IBM Global Business Services. He has years of experience working with commercial, state government, and federal government agencies, serving both technical and operational roles. He is also a longtime mentor who became involved with mentoring during his senior year at Penn State, and he continues to mentor students and colleagues today. Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Whitney. Thanks, Catherine. Like you said, I'm a IBMer, I'm a mentor, I'm a lifelong learner, but most importantly, I'm extremely excited and honored to be the guest speaker for today's session and looking forward to insightful and engaged in dialogue.
We're so excited to have you with us today, and we're excited to have everyone who's joined us with this discussion, and we want to encourage your participation. So at any point throughout the discussion, please don't hesitate to use that Q&A chat window, because we're here to answer your questions, and Jeremy's here to answer your questions. So Jeremy, I want to start by asking you what it means when we talk about mentoring relationships. Are we talking about receiving feedback, or is it more than that?
So I really think it's the combination of the two, and it also depends on the goals you set as a mentor or mentee. Feedback is definitely crucial, especially when you're earlier in your career or just finishing undergrad. Oftentimes you want to know how to move to the next level, how to progress in your career, your expertise, your industry. So that feedback is necessarily to go from point A to point Z. As you get more experience in your career, sometimes it's more so just being able to kind of rattling off some of the issues that you've faced, and then having someone who can provide their guidance as to how you could overcome those hurdles. So the relationship really depends on where you are in your life or in your career, but feedback is definitely an important piece.
Catherine?
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree, Jeremy, that feedback is so important, and sometimes it's what we want to hear, and sometimes it's not. So how to take that feedback in the spirit that's intended is really important. But one of the things I always like to think about with respect to mentoring is feedback's an important part of mentoring, but if it's only feedback, it becomes a little bit more of a one-way street, I think, where the mentor is sharing something with the mentee, but it's not always back and forth. Where the mentoring relationship, I think, is what takes it to that two-way level, where it's maybe a little bit more give and take. Do you kind of find that as well in your experience?
No, absolutely. And that's a great point, because I feel as though the mentor-mentee relationship is beneficial when both the mentor and mentee are able to kind of meet their unique needs. As a mentor, you want to be able to provide your career guidance or your insights to better prepare someone to navigate the murky waters of their industry. But at the same time, it's also a mutually beneficial experience because you actually learn a lot from your mentee. I'm currently engaged in mentoring at IBM, and ironically, one of my mentees is a Penn Stater. So me bringing in my industry knowledge in cybersecurity and IT infrastructure, I was able to frame certain things in a perspective that she didn't understand because she just didn't have industry expertise. But because she's still in undergrad, because she's learning about some of the new and emerging technologies, and Penn State does an amazing job of preparing students for the world, she was able to throw some hypotheticals at me that I just never really thought about because I don't see that in my day-to-day working with the federal government. So it allowed us to really kind of brainstorm, collaborate, and identify how we can leverage our unique skill sets to come up with unique solutions. And we were both able to learn from that one opportunity by both providing our perspective of the world.
So Jeremy, what does it take to be that good mentor? And what are those? You mean you've talked about a lot of the qualities and characteristics. What are those qualities or characteristics a student or professional should look for when they're considering a mentor?
So definitely from a student or early professional hire standpoint, I think one, ultimately time. Sometimes you can find someone who looks perfect on paper. They have X amount of years in the industry. They literally written the book on some topics. But if their personal circumstance doesn't allow them to effectively meet with you and establish a relationship, as a mentee, you're not going to benefit from that relationship because the mentor is not literally not going to have enough time. So I think time is a crucial part. Another thing is identifying the mentor who is relatable to you, because I feel as though when they're relatable, um, that oftentimes allows you to really foster a unique and organic relationship versus um, some programs where they kind of just force you with a mentor and it feels as though you're being strung along with the topics and conversations that you have to discuss. So time and relatableness is definitely two key factors that can make or break the mentor-mentee relationship.
So what happens when they don't have time? Is there a way to, if it's somebody that you really want as your mentor, if it's that person that you look up to, is there a way to come back to them at some point, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at mentoring as literally like a relationship. Sometimes it's not a matter of if the mentor is a good fit for you now. Sometimes you just need to wait and
Mhm.
have life circumstance kind of dictate the direction of when you two can actually engage in that dialogue and establish a meaningful relationship. I actually had a mentor who, when I first joined IBM, they had left another big consultant firm. And we had similar backgrounds. We were both first-gen American. He was a security leader, and I was just getting my feet wet in security. Because he just had a child, he just transitioned from industry to industry. That wasn't the ideal time to meet with him, and we already knew that because we had a really engaging conversation.
Mhm.
But later on in my career, we piggybacked and had a conversation with each other. We figured that this is a perfect time to actually re-engage, especially now that I have more knowledge of what I want to focus on, and we were able to establish a great relationship. So sometimes it's not a matter of the relationship isn't good for you. It's more so a matter of the relationship isn't good for you at this moment. And sometimes
Mm.
you just have to wait.
Gotcha. And Catherine, are there additional behaviors that students or young professionals should seek out when they're looking for that mentor?
I think Jeremy brings up a great point about time.
Mm.
It really, to find someone who really wants to spend the time with you and to engage in the relationship. I think that's incredibly important. I think it's also important that in a mentor-mentee relationship that you set some goals early on so that you both understand what you're going to get out of the relationship or what you want to achieve from the relationship. I think it's also important to realize that you may not have one mentor does not fit all. It's not one size fits all. And I know from my own perspective, I have multiple mentors. I have a few that have been with me for more years than I care to admit. And I have some that have been somewhat transient. So when I'm looking to gain a skill that I know I need pushed on, I'll find someone to help mentor me through that growth process.
So,
And
let me interrupt you for a second and ask. So, do you mean simultaneous mentors or successive? Or is that okay to have them at the same time?
I do. I mean, I
Okay.
have them all integrated and interwoven.
Jeremy, what's your thought on that?
No, I agree with Catherine 100%.
Okay. Okay.
I actually have two different mentors. One focuses more so on my current industry in the federal space, and then one who's in the commercial space. He brings a different perspective, but he has a overall experience of how business is done on a global perspective. So I leverage both mentors for different avenues of life that I'm focused on. And
Okay.
also piggybacking off of Catherine, sometimes you could also have a formal mentor as well as an informal mentor as well. They both bring unique experiences and perspectives for.
Okay. And we have a comment here. Sometimes we select mentors in our minds that are really not what we need. Sometimes being aware and open to the people and relationships around us can allow us to discover mentors. And that's a great point. You're talking about formal and informal mentors. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so your traditional formal mentor, and this is something that most universities and large organizations do, is where they establish a program, they let you select a bunch of interests, they kind of gauge the direction of who may be the best fit for you. And then there's a structured program where you set up your goals. It's a finite schedule of how long the relationship takes place. And um, sometimes it can be extremely beneficial, especially if you're goal driven and you lay everything up front.
Mhm.
But if you don't know where you progress, I feel as though the formal structure doesn't necessarily work for everyone because you're still trying to figure out who you are at the end of the day. And because it's time boxed, you kind of get forced into going one way or the other. But from an informal mentor's perspective, sometimes it's as easy as just picking someone's brain. I actually have a friend who reached out to me and considered me a informal mentor just because we're best friends. He recently transitioned to IBM for a brief stint to get brought up to speed in emerging technologies and went to another company. But it was interesting that he looked at me as an informal mentor because we already had a great relationship. He's my best friend. So, I mean, from a relation standpoint, it doesn't get any better than that. But I was able to just say, like, hey, this is what you should focus on in the next 30, 60, 90 days if you want to go this way. Um,
Mm.
and it didn't feel forced. It felt as though like I was truly trying to help him out because we were friends. So informal mentoring kind of just takes the place where you don't necessarily consider someone a quote unquote mentor on paper, but they're just there to support you, provide guidance, and to ultimately have your back when it comes to your career guidance at the end of the day.
Okay. So should and obviously with a friend like this, I mean, that's an easy call to make about, those kinds of values that you might share. And similarities as far as the kinds of things and interests and things like that. But should a mentor or mentee share similar characteristics, backgrounds, and values? I mean, especially if you have multiple potential multiple mentors. I mean, is that kind of thing important?
So if you have multiple, I think having diversity in the experiences of your mentor is extremely important. If you're focusing on just a one-to-one relationship with a mentor, I do think having those similarities does play a huge factor into being able to have those organic conversations and being able to really feel as though you're benefiting from the mentor-mentee relationship. So I think it just depends on how you're tackling the process. If you want to focus on the one-to-one relationship, I definitely agree that having those similarities makes the process easier and more organic. But if you have multiple mentors based on different avenues of your life, your industry, your profession, um, that diversity and experience and similarities and things of that nature also help you in the long run as well.
I think
So,
something I wanted to build on with that, Jeremy, I think you're absolutely right on target. I think one of the common threads through all of these different mentors is that it's someone that we can be vulnerable with. Um,
mm,
because when we're seeking out a mentoring relationship, we actually are really letting ourselves, kind of putting ourselves out there. And many of us, when we get entrenched in our professional careers, feel like, oh, we're already leaders, we need to have the answers. Or we're students coming out of school, we're maybe a little bit more open as students to saying, I don't know what I'm doing. But as we move along in our careers, being vulnerable and saying, I really don't know what I'm doing here. I need somebody to process this with, or to give me some focus. That's not always easy. So I think having someone that you feel that connection to, that you feel is really not going to say, well, how come you don't know that by now? But instead, they're really going to give you perspective, which is what you're looking for. I often try to find people who I have a relationship with, but who will push me out of my comfort zone.
mm,
I like mentors who make me really think, who don't just say, Catherine, you're doing a great job, keep doing what you're doing. I like to hear that. But I really also like to hear, but have you thought about this? Or if I've
okay.
encountered a thorny problem and I can process it with my mentor will say, maybe you're causing some of what you're feeling. And so I think that relationship piece really does kind of cut across all the different uses and needs that we have for mentoring. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, Catherine, I agree. I think that vulnerability piece is key because we've all met people, whether it's in academia, whether it's in the business world, where you provide them with corrective and constructive feedback, and they kind of just brush it off, and then they put themselves back into a rabbit hole or a bad predicament. because they're not willing to open up and embrace that change or that diversity of thought. So I think by acknowledging that you're not perfect and you may make mistakes, and that there may be a better or more efficient way to tackle a problem, I think that really does allow you to grow as an individual.
So what kinds of questions should you ask yourself as you're looking at potential mentors to figure out if this is the right mentor for me?
So oftentimes I like to lead with, why does the individual want to be a mentor? Because sometimes people just want to be a mentor so they can check the box on their performance review and say,
That's kind of what I'm wondering.
they want to say, hey, I've mentored X amount of people and this is why I should be promoted as a thought leader in XYZ. And that's when you feel as though you're forced in that mentor-mentee relationship. And that's where I feel as though the formalized version can sometimes introduce issues because someone just wants to check the box for compliance reasons. So I think one, understanding why they want to become a mentor, understanding if they have the ability and the time to actually make that commitment. And then three, also being able to provide you with guidance in a constructive way, because sometimes people are extremely knowledgeable about their domain or industry, but the way they provide you with feedback is lackluster at best. So I think you have to be able to effectively communicate with your mentee, be able to have time to actually have that relationship with them, and then ultimately want to be a mentor at the end of the day and pass it forward.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point about wanting to be one. You know, something else I often think about is what I need from a mentor from an approach perspective. And I find some of my most effective mentors don't say, oh, here's what you should do. They ask me really good questions. And when I think of probably the most effective mentor for me, it's not someone who says, here's how you should approach this. It's, have you considered this? Or have you thought about that? And then it gets me thinking. And in a way, they've steered me in a direction without me even realizing I've been steered. And then later I'll come back and say, you know, that one question that you asked me, this is what made me think. And I find that I often have a whole new perspective from just a simple conversation. So that ability to really ask questions rather than tell you what to do.
And I feel as though by asking questions, you feel more empowered to make the change versus you being forced to make the change. So I think that's an amazing point.
Just a reminder, we want to encourage questions throughout the discussion. So at any point, use that Q&A or the chat window. We're here to answer your questions. We've talked about having more than one mentor and the different types of mentors. What are the benefits for all the parties involved? We've talked about that, you know, two-way mentor relationship, but there's also a lot of benefit to the organization as well.
So from an organizational standpoint, I think it's sometimes as easy as retaining top tier individuals. I know, especially in large organizations, oftentimes people leave not because they didn't perform well, but they didn't feel supported. They didn't have any guidance. They just didn't know how to progress to the next level. And a mentor could help you extensively with kind of understanding where you want to go and what's the best course of action to take to get from point A to point B. So I definitely think that that sense of direction is key for the organization. For a mentee, they get to learn something new. They get to pick someone's brain, kind of learn from their mistakes and their accomplishments, and allow them to tailor the feedback from their mentor to ultimately advance their career. And then from the mentor's perspective, you're able to say that you were able to give back, give to the next generation of employees, and ultimately help someone get to where they want to be in their career. And if you do it right, you can also learn from your mentee as well, because they bring a new set of eyes to a given problem.
And Catherine, what about the benefits in the university setting and in healthcare? Those are your areas of expertise.
You know, it's interesting. I often find that the mentee questions are ones that I often learn about, because so much of being I mentor a lot of people in both healthcare and academic world, and I've been mentored myself, but in having to answer those questions and in sometimes having to help someone navigate we realize the assumptions that we make about what people, how things work. And we think everyone sees that. And so I think organically it makes me step back and really sort of break down the cause and effect of what's happening as I'm able to explain that to my mentee. As I think about myself being mentored, I do have mentors still in healthcare. From healthcare, I have, and two from academics. I had no idea how to navigate universities when I first started teaching. I found the similarities between being in healthcare, and when you think about it, the physicians are the faculty and the administration is administration and the patients are the students. And so the dynamics are very similar, but learning how to navigate the academy was something totally new for me. And I actually found that mentor by word of mouth. I was looking for someone to be on my doctoral committee, and that person was retiring, but said, hey, I've got a really good person who can not only help you there, but can help you navigate the academy. And that person is still with me all these years later, still helping me navigate the academy sometimes. So it is helpful. What really surprised me about being in a mentor-mentee relationship, especially thinking about myself being mentored, was the times that mentors have called me for my advice as the mentee. And my first thought was, wait a minute, you're my mentor. How can I help you with this? And one of my mentors is a former CEO boss of mine, and he was interested in getting into teaching. And so he called me one day to see how that works. And I thought, oh, wow, how cool is this? I'm not just taking all the time. I'm actually giving back too.
And I bet that's happened to Jeremy too.
Yeah, Catherine, that's actually an amazing point, because I actually just recently stumbled upon a similar instance. So IBM is really involved in corporate social responsibility and challenging the status quo. So recently IBM put out a program known as Embrace to kind of fight against systemic racism within the United States. So one of the key initiatives that IBM is focusing on is actually reverse mentoring, to your point, where they're getting feedback from a diverse set of candidates to kind of understand some of the pain points that consultants from underrepresented minority groups are facing in their day-to-day jobs, and to kind of analyze that data so that IBM could better respond and allow for a more inclusive environment. And so definitely at the organizational standpoint, they're seeing a lot of benefit from a reverse mentoring approach as well.
Great. So I have a couple questions coming in, and one of them, I think both of you have just touched on a little bit of this, but I want to break it down a little more, because Jeremy, you definitely gave some of this as, I know. The question is, what do the mentor-mentee relationships actually consist of? And you're talking about insight, you're talking about advice, you're talking about coming to the mentor with questions and things like that, but let's break it down a little bit more. So Jeremy, if you want to tackle that one first.
Yeah. So I think to really understand what the mentor-mentee relationship consists of, you really need to do some level setting when you first have that dialogue with your mentor or your mentee, and understand what you want to get out of it at the end of the day. Because what I may want to get out of a mentor-mentee relationship is going to be different from Catherine based on our background, what we're going through in our day-to-day lives and things of that nature. So I think it's important to, one, have that one-on-one conversation with your mentor and mentee and to establish a baseline. And then two, work towards how you could better facilitate engagement that meets those needs of your unique relationship. So with my current mentee from Penn State, what she wanted to focus on during our mentee-mentor relationship was, one, a different perspective of what's going on in the industry. Two, someone who she could piggyback ideas off of, because she kind of has an idea of what she already wants to do, but she doesn't know if it's feasible. She doesn't know what are the best practices, things of that nature. Three, someone who goals will just help her grow as both a practitioner as well as an individual, especially since we're both involved in a lot of organizations outside our day-to-day activities. And then four, sometimes it's as simple as just having someone who you can kind of voice your concerns with. It's very interesting that sometimes your mentee will just vent to you, and then by venting, they just come up with some crazy solution to solve the problem that they were facing. And oftentimes they may not have that person to go to and have that conversation with, which is why that personalization, that organic chemistry with your mentor and mentee is important, because going back to Catherine's point, when you're vulnerable, you allow yourself to be open, you allow yourself to receive feedback and criticism, and you allow yourself to ultimately change your perspective on a given stance or circumstance.
Let me ask you a question though here, and I was going to ask this a little bit later, but are there any issues of, especially maybe in the corporate environment, where junior employees might be a little bit concerned about venting or seeking out help because it might make them look, it might put them in maybe a negative light next to their peers if they're looking for advancement, if they're maybe being mentored by someone at a higher executive level or something like that?
Gotcha. No, that's definitely a fair question. I think one way to kind of circumvent that situation is to have someone who's a mentor, but they're not your direct report. That way it's a more candid and a more anonymous experience where they're not going back to your direct manager and saying, hey, my mentee, your employee just said X, Y, and Z. I having someone who's outside of your, for lack of better words, chain of command definitely allows you to kind of open up and be more vulnerable without feeling as though your employer is going to take negative action upon you for voicing your concern.
Right. Okay. And we have another question. Are there any PSU resources like websites where grad students can find career mentors? Catherine.
Yeah,
I know our unit has a lot of them, but in general, I guess would be the question.
You know, there are some in liberal arts. The career network does
The Career
have
Enrichment
some,
Network.
yeah, Career Enrichment Network does have some resources. Through the School of Public Policy, we also have a more formal mentoring program. And, you know, one of the first things I'd recommend is that you reach out to your advisor or you reach out to a career professional in one of those areas. If you were a student in public policy, I would ask you to reach out to me because it's one of the things I do, which is to introduce people and make connections and build networks. Because as a student, you don't always know who to reach out to. You don't know what the resources are. And as I meet alums and as I meet people in the field and as I know people in the field from all of my years of experience, I'm always happy to try to make those connections. The Alumni Association also has a more formal program as well. And even though you're currently students, you're viewed as future alumni. So there are also some opportunities that you could tap through there. But
and I know Jeremy works very closely with those groups as well.
Shameless
and
plug.
continues and continues to mentor Penn State students.
Yeah, so the platform you're referencing is Fast Start. So it's definitely an amazing program. That's actually how I got involved as a mentor while I was still doing undergrad during my senior year. And then I continued to re-engage the current students as an alumni mentor as well.
And that is one of the marvelous things about Penn State is that our alums are, and Jeremy, as soon as I said, would you please do or I invited him to do a professional development webinar, I was like, yep, how soon can I be there? And that's what you typically find. So when you're kind of seeking that out, use your internal resources, you know, if you're currently a student, to help you to make those connections, because that's what we're here to do. And we're happy to do that. And in many cases, I end up serving as the mentor a little bit until we get the right fit.
So to play up on this question about mentoring at finding those networks at Penn State or finding those resources at Penn State, how does a student or professional find a mentor? And then even further than that, how do you make that ask? Jeremy, I've asked you this.
I will tackle that question.
I'd love for you to tackle this.
So COVID really changed the game as far as how to search.
That was another question, by the way.
In a traditional stance. I know oftentimes Penn State will have a lot of the big companies, the big organizations, and just like notable alumni just come back and kind of provide guidance to the current students. And sometimes those conversations organically form a mentor-mentee relationship. One thing that I can definitely say about Penn Staters is the fact that they really do want to give back to their alma mater at the end of the day. But now with COVID, with everything being digital, with no face-to-face interaction for the most part, one thing that I've known that's extremely useful is what I like to call LinkedIn creeping, where you actually just search for someone who meets your expectations, who has a similar background. They may work for the company that you want to work in or work in the industry that you want to work in. one thing I always say, if you are going to just reach out to someone on LinkedIn for a mentor-mentee relationship, personalize your message. Oftentimes, I know a lot of people who will just hit send on the friend request, and then me as a cybersecurity professional, I'm just going to deny it if I don't see anything that why you're reaching out to me, because I'm probably going to think it's spam or someone from a foreign country trying to do a information operation type of scheme. But when your message is more personalized, one, it allows the mentor to kind of frame where they can take you in the mentor-mentee relationship because they actually have an idea of what you want. And then two, it kind of identifies that you are a person, you are a human, you have needs and things of that nature. So if you are going to take the LinkedIn approach, definitely personalize your message and let it be known why you're reaching out to that person. And oftentimes they'll just respond back and say, yep, sure, set something up. Or if life circumstance dictates that they just don't have the time, they may just say, hey, I'm unavailable for like the next 30, 60, 90 days, but maybe we could pick off later on in life. So definitely customize your message if you're going to take the LinkedIn approach.
That's excellent advice.
I love that
especially
LinkedIn creeping.
I just, that especially for soon-to-be graduates, recent graduates, using LinkedIn is especially important, but personalizing that message is something that people don't often tell you. So great advice.
Just piggybacking on that for a second, it's also, if you're sitting in on a webinar and this, I think what we're dealing with now with so much being virtual gives you the opportunity to have exposure to people that are geographically distant from where you might be, but who still might be able to, but who you still feel some connection with. And this just happened to me last week. I was doing a student leader webinar, and after the webinar, I got an email from the student that said, hey, I really connected with what you were talking about. I think that I'd really like to pick your brain a little bit about where I'm headed with my career and what I want to do in the future. Do you have a few minutes to spend with me? Well, of course I do. And so, that's, if you meet someone or you find somebody that you connect with or you feel a connection with, it never hurts to reach out. As Jeremy said, it might not be the right time. But you might then say, well, do you know someone else who I might be able to talk with? And that's how you begin to build your network. Because over the life of a very long career, I'm sure Jeremy might say the same. It's that network of people who come in and out of your sphere who make you who you are.
Yeah.
And oftentimes help you with that job or that industry change or that reset that you need.
Yeah, and you've mentioned what to do if you get turned down by that prospective mentor, which is great to maybe try them again later, ask them when they might be available later. What if you are an aspiring mentor? How do you seek out a mentee? What about that aspect of it?
So shameless plug, definitely going to advocate for Fast Start just because it really did help, especially getting to work with underrepresented groups on campus. They definitely benefited directly from having someone who could provide guidance to them. And because we had similar circumstances and backgrounds, it was well received. Oftentimes, it's also just being a leader in your current student organization, and then being able to kind of foster conversations and relationships with your current membership base, or the membership base of other organizations that you may want to focus on when it comes to that mentor-mentee relationship. I think one thing students take for granted is how large their network actually is on campus, which is crazy because like even now after graduating, DC is one of the largest areas out of Pennsylvania with Penn State alumni. And a lot of the people who I still have good relationships with in the professional world were Penn Staters who knew me from my time running the student organizations on campus, and we were able to kind of just pick each other's brains on a broad sense of topics and things of that nature. So leveraging your network and kind of figuring out how you can add value to people who you already work with is a way to start becoming a mentor. And then also leveraging some of the programs that the university has.
Catherine, what are your thoughts?
I think that's an outstanding point, Jeremy. You don't have to be a certain age or a certain level of experience to be a mentor. And I think that as students, we often think, or students often think that, well, I don't have enough experience to be a mentor. But clubs and organizations are a wonderful place to find or to be a mentor and to get your feet wet, to get some experience. So for example, if you're a club officer or an aspiring club officer, how are you growing your group? And how are you helping people within the group to grow so that when you're no longer a leader in that organization, that there's a leadership plan in place? So what example do you set? What conversations do you have? How do you build relationship with people within your organization that can help you to practice your mentoring skills? Because you ultimately, whether you're in a student organization as a student or whether you're in an organization as a leader or aspiring leader, we're always leaving a trail. You want to leave that trail that helps people to be better because they've worked with you, and to have grown because they worked with you. And one of the earlier questions that I saw about what the mentor-mentee relationship looks like, we talked a bit about formal relationship, mentoring relationships, which tend to be more structured around meeting frequency and setting goals and objectives, which are always important. But there's also that organic piece to it that, you don't have to meet once a week if you don't need to meet once a week. Maybe you meet, you agree, you set those parameters yourself. So there's this idea that mentoring is all about structure. And yes, structure does help you to go beyond what you might normally get from just a friendship or a peer-to-peer relationship. But it'll happen as you need it to happen.
No, Catherine, I think the point that you made about the frequency is huge, because I actually ran into that issue earlier on in the year where I had a new mentor and we tried to meet every 2 weeks. And it felt forced because sometimes you don't have 2 weeks worth of material to back brief something on. So we took a more flexible approach where we would say at least once a month, but we wouldn't necessarily set it in advance. It'd be more so like, I'll just hit them on Slack and say, hey, can we meet? Yep, free. And then we'll have a conversation. And it made our lives so much easier because we were stressing about what we talk about in our current session, because sometimes it's just a long week, you're mentally drained, or nothing happened. It's an uneventful week and you really don't have anything to discuss.
And you don't want the pressure of feeling like, oh, I've got my mentor meeting, now I have to prepare for it. And it's so funny because I just had that conversation this morning with one of my mentees. And she said to me, well, next week's a really crazy week. And then the following week's Thanksgiving. Do you think it would be a bad idea if we waited till December to meet next? And I said, what do you think? What are your needs? And she was like, I think it would be okay. And so we always know how to find me in between. And so we left it at that, but you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be a stressful situation where you're now feeling like you're reporting to your mentor and you have to prepare for your mentor. It's really about creating that collegial kind of environment where you can be yourself and you can be safe.
So I want to remind everybody, we are taking questions, so be sure to use that Q&A window or the chat at any point. We've talked a little bit about some of the issues that might arise, such as time management, what you might need to do if a potential or prospective mentor says they're not available right now. But what happens when the mentor-mentee relationship isn't working? And maybe the mentor doesn't have time and they've already committed to the mentorship. What do you do then, Jeremy?
So I think part of the issue in those circumstances is sometimes you just need to voice your concern, and that way you could potentially either A, course correct, or B, unfortunately, you may need to end the mentor-mentee relationship. But mentors and mentees, neither are psychics. If you don't voice your concerns, no one is going to necessarily pick up that there may be an issue or shortfall in the relationship or anything of that nature. So I think it's important to have that open and honest dialogue with your mentor or mentee and say, hey, things just aren't working out. These are my concerns. How could we move forward to bettering the solution or the situation? And if unfortunately we can't better it, then it may be more beneficial to just end the relationship on a high note versus to kind of drag it on.
I think communication is like a major theme here between the back and forth communication that has to be open between the mentor and the mentees in order for it to be successful.
To piggyback
So,
on that a little bit, I think that really emphasizes the importance that you pointed out earlier, Jeremy, about having objectives and goals for the mentor relationship. So it gives you a framework to open the door to have that conversation. You know, hey, at the beginning of our time together, we kind of set these goals, and let's talk about what's happening and what might not be happening. And I think it gives you a little bit of a framework, because those aren't easy conversations, especially if you maybe feel like picked a mentor who is in a position that you aspire to someday. Do you find that that kind of approach works?
No, absolutely. And I think one issue, especially when you're mentoring or being a mentee for the first time, is also knowing how long that relationship should last.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you may feel as though you need to be in a mentor-mentee relationship forever, which isn't necessarily the case. Sometimes relationships just have to end, and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily because of anything negative. Sometimes you just reach the point where your mentor was able to provide you with everything you needed to get you to that next step. So you don't necessarily have to have that formal relationship, and you can always circle back with them, have an honest dialogue, and continue it maybe even at a friendship level if you really love the working relationship that you have. Um, but the relationship does eventually end at the end of the day, and sometimes it's identifying when it's time to move on to the next person who can get you to the next level, um, or maybe just reframe what you're working on and continue working with that mentor, but the different avenue of area that you want to improve.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. It should not be the meeting committee or the committee that never ends. There is and sometimes it just organically goes away by itself.
great point. We have an excellent question here from one of our attendees that's right in line with something I was going to ask you next. We mentioned before how COVID has changed things, Jeremy, and one of the things that this attendee is saying, I'm nervous about finding a mentor. I think COVID has really changed the career world, and I'm scared I won't be able to find and maintain a good mentor relationship. Any advice? And I was going to ask you about that. We're talking a lot about these organic relationships. You're meeting people and they just happen to form very organically. And this person's asking about how COVID has really changed the career world. And we're not forming those organic career relationships as easily. What's your advice?
Yeah, so as far as being afraid about maintaining a good relationship, I think the one benefit of COVID is the fact that everyone is feeling stressed and pressured at this time. So I think people are more flexible now than they've ever been. I even see it in just like the regular workday with meetings where we may have a set meeting at 12 o'clock and then something happens and everyone's just like, well, let's just move it to the right or let's schedule it to another day. I think people are expecting uncertainty, to say the least. So I think as long as you're open early in the conversation with your mentor, saying that, hey, I definitely want to foster a meaningful relationship. I want to learn. I want to be able to pick your brain and continue to work with you. But you don't know what your time constraints are going to be. I think people are going to be more receptive of that, especially given the circumstances now, than if you just try to fight on through the chaos of life and not really give them a heads up. Because if you give someone a heads up, they could at least say, okay, well, you already told me that life's certain at this point, so that's fine. But if you don't give that heads up, they may think that you're just being dismissive, that you're not taking the relationship seriously. So I think it's just important to have that conversation with them. And if they're a mentor worth your time, they're going to be able to understand that you have those issues and work with you to better provide you service.
So a lot of companies and organizations have formal mentor programs, and we talked about this earlier, but a lot of them are as a part of the onboarding process. But now that we're in the current new normal, I don't know that a lot of that's happening. So a lot of new employees are out there on their own. We had a lot of our interns who we had 100% of our interns secure virtual internships, but they didn't get to meet their coworkers face to face. So they didn't get that personal interaction. So I'm imagining the question we just had is kind of feeling that stress from not being able to form those personal relationships and maybe make those relationships that would lead to a mentor. So Yeah, I'm hearing you, but I'm still feeling that stress that person might be feeling
Yeah,
as well.
that makes sense. I know at IBM, for example, we have what's called a pair buddy. So we pair someone
Mhm.
who has X amount of experience with an incoming intern, so that way they have someone who they can kind of work with. Um, I think one thing that definitely helps you is if you set up meetings via WebEx, Zoom, or a virtual meeting where you can kind of see their face and kind of
Mhm.
feel their energy virtually. There's no substitute for having that in-person conversation or just meeting up to get coffee and having that dialogue. But I do notice that meeting virtually with a webcam and actually being able to see people's facial expressions, things of that nature, at least give you some resemblance of normalcy versus just being on a phone call or being on a Zoom session with the camera off. And sometimes it just feels as though you're talking to an abyss. So I think it's hard, and there's no easy way around it. Uh, but I think leveraging your virtual tools to the best of your ability definitely at least gives you some sense of normalcy versus uh, just being down and out and counting it as a loss at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful perspective, and I want to add just a little bit of a twist to it, because I think as people have gotten more comfortable, I think back to 6 months ago, 8 months ago, the months actually are adding up as I think about how long we've been doing this. I remember when not long ago, the idea of a conference call was about as much as people were willing to do virtually. And the idea of a video call and to make these personal connections was something off in the future. And I think the real benefit of this virtual world right now is one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is being able to connect across geography. But I think there's also a time element, because, and I think about some of my kind of pre-COVID mentoring relationships. I had to not only factor in the time I'm spending with my mentor mentee, but then traveling to get there, and the coffee that we have while we're sitting and talking, and now it's a Zoom call. I don't have to do anything but send a Zoom link, and we're there. And so I think it makes it almost easier to connect in some ways. I don't ever want to discount the physical being in the same place together physically, but I think there are lots of benefits to having the technology to support the growth. So you can be a little bit nervous right now, but look at the advantages and navigate through it.
So we're talking about adapting to this new normal, but how do we deal with some of these situations? We're seeing ourselves in our homes, and it might make us want to open up a little bit more to make each other feel more comfortable. But tell us about dealing with professional boundaries and personal situations. What's your advice on handling sensitive situations while adhering to professional and academic policies? I guess this is for both of you, because Catherine might deal more with the academic side of the policies.
Got you. So I'll talk about the boundaries perspective because that's definitely an issue that teams that I've worked with have faced, especially because IBM is an international company. So what we've done on similar projects that I've worked in the past are establish what we call core hours, which are hours that you have to be available within a certain range. So that way people can actually reach out to you, have a conversation, whether it's phone, Zoom, WebEx, or things of that nature. But then we have these flex hours where that's your time to shine, that's your time to take care of your family, do your grocery shopping, bulk up on paper products and things of that nature. And it's almost now become a cultural norm within the industry to not bother people during those hours so that they can take care of their life, because when your life's not in order, it's going to seep into your working life as well. So by establishing those rules of engagement when working in a digital environment, I think that's extremely crucial and important because it allows you the flexibility to focus on what you need to focus on, while not feeling as though you have to join every call or literally invite someone into your house every hour of the day because you're on a virtual meeting.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Boundary setting is important in terms of talking about the expectations. And I'm in an industry that's kind of 24/7 and came from a healthcare industry that's also 24/7, and really, it can get very draining to be always available. And establishing that mutual relationship together, letting people know when it's okay to cross that boundary or not. But as I think about mentoring from a student perspective, I do try to keep the kind of what are we trying to achieve professionally for you at front and center. But there are times when students will share with me other things that they're struggling with. And those are somewhat outside of the boundaries of a mentor-mentee relationship. And so my role is to then try to help them to get connected to the resources that will help to support them through what they're dealing with. So for example, when COVID started and there were a lot of the issues students were facing around finances and how do I not, I've lost my job now, and that's not something I can fix, but the university have a lot of resources that can do that. And I would presume within your organization as well, Jeremy, if you're mentoring somebody and you discover that maybe EAP or some other organizational service might be helpful, that you can play a wonderful role in being the conduit to connecting your mentee to those things.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny that you brought up EAP specifically because there's been a huge push to provide various services so that practitioners can deal with the uncertainty of life in the pandemic. I know IBM has made a lot of strategic imperatives and investments with a lot of mental health organizations, for example, that you can register through your EAP program. And that way you could take time off to kind of mellow out and focus on your immediate needs versus being in a client-facing role. So I think definitely having these HR benefits, having an easy way to kind of say, hey, I can't help you in this domain because I'm not an HR manager, or I may feel uncomfortable handling the situation, but I can direct you to another person who could better situate you. I think that's also a very important part as well.
Yeah, we're not there to fix every part of someone's life.
Exactly. Very good point.
Good point. We have another question. It says a bit off topic, but is Greek life a good place to find a mentor? It is seen as a positive characteristic in the career world.
So, I'm extremely biased. So I'm a Delta Chi, and I actually met a bunch of Delta Chis at IBM. And then I've also had a lot of friends from other Greek organizations. It definitely is a great network once you graduate, especially when you find individuals from your organization in your organization. So I definitely think that's definitely a great avenue because they're definitely willing to pay it forward because that sense of brotherhood and sisterhood is kind of already engraved in the organizational culture. So that's definitely great to kind of leverage after undergrad.
But we're also talking again about having those multiple mentors. So that's one part of your network.
Yeah,
which is good. So
it's where you find those leaders and where those networks are. And I was not part of Greek life, but I know that Greek life has a wonderful network, and it's really not about the life as much as it's finding people that inspire you, that can help you to grow. Whether that's an alum, whether that's from Greek life, whether that's from residence halls, wherever they are, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Again, we still have time for a few more questions, but I wanted to ask about Jeremy. We talked a little bit about, we talked a lot about the importance of the empathetic elements and giving, affirmation in good mentoring relationships. We want to portray the skills that our mentees should want to develop, and we talked about constructive criticism, but what about the tough love aspect? Any advice for delivering that bad news and maybe those difficult conversations? And on the flip side, not just for delivering it, but maybe how to receive it. Because for the mentee, that's particularly difficult oftentimes.
Okay, absolutely. So that's a great topic. Both as a people manager as well as a mentor, oftentimes what I've noticed is if you just give the negative feedback without any way for your mentee or your employee to course correct, they're probably going to shoot that down and feel as though you're bullying them because you're really just ripping them to shreds and you're not providing any constructive feedback as to how they could improve upon their situation. So I think it's inevitable. Sometimes you're going to make a mistake, and sometimes people are going to have to tell you that, hey, you made a mistake. This isn't the best way to do things. But I think putting it in a polite and professional tone, and then letting your mentee or your employee know that, okay, you might have made a mistake, but this is how you could kind of navigate those murky waters and either avoid the mistake in its entirety, or to just use a completely different aspect or avenue of attack to implement a solution. It's definitely a great way to kind of avoid just feeling as though you're just ran into your employee or mentee without providing them with anything of substance at the end of the day.
Catherine?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. You don't want to feel like you walked into a blender. The other thing, it's interesting because as a mentor, when you have to give that hard feedback, the thing I try to remind myself is that I'm also modeling. And so how I choose to provide that feedback in the way that I frame it is how then that mentee will not only receive it, but perhaps then model it with others when they're in a relationship where they're mentoring. And so I really try to be intentional and to really think about framing an approach. When I'm on the receiving end of it, I also have to frame it because as a mentee, we don't always want to hear what we're not doing well. And so I sometimes have to just sit back and say, okay. And then I have to sometimes contextualize it because my mentors aren't perfect either in terms of how they feed it back. But I think what you've said is absolutely right on target. It's that two-way conversation where you can have a conversation about it. It's not one way. It's not, well, this is my perception, so this is how it is. Yeah.
No, Catherine, I think that's a great point of modeling, because you have to practice what you preach at the end of the day as well. If you're providing feedback, but you're doing the same things that you're critiquing someone on, it's going to fall upon deaf ears. So by living the values that you preach, I think that's also very important when having any type of relationship from a mentee standpoint or a manager-employee standpoint as well.
Yeah, I do a lot of strengths coaching in addition to it as part of my mentoring kind of relationships. And I was just having the conversation this morning with one of my mentees because she was struggling with putting context around something to get her team to understand what she wanted to do. And I said, well, I think that it's time for your arranger to step forward a little bit rather than your activator who likes to just do all the work. and she said, you know what? I didn't think about that. I think you're absolutely right. So again, a great way of just asking the question without really telling.
Before we finish up today, Jeremy, I wanted to ask you to talk to us about your greatest insight from being a mentor and being mentored, because you've been in both positions.
I think my greatest insight, and it applies both ways. Definitely, your way of thinking may not necessarily be the best way of thinking. And that's important from both a mentor and mentee perspective, because going back to the earlier point in the conversation, you really do learn a lot as both a mentor and a mentee. And that relationship allows you to have a diverse perspective of life, both for the personal as well as professional engagements. So by kind of understanding where someone's coming from, you could understand if what you're trying to say, what you're trying to push, what you're trying to solution is effective or not, based on now a new set of criteria that you may not have even factored because you lived in your own bubble prior to having that relationship.
That's great. And any final words of advice?
I would say from both a mentor and mentee perspective, be open with the relationship. It can go any number of ways just based on life circumstances and things of that nature. I think having that open and honest relationship and being able to both receive as well as give feedback from a mentor and mentee perspective is definitely useful and needed at the end of the day.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to our special guest, Jeremy Omard. And thank you all for your great questions. We hope you'll join us Wednesday, December 9th at 11:30 when we talk about leading with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can watch past events from this and our other series at the School of Public Policy website at publicpolicy.psu.edu. pennstate.edu. I'm Whitney Sheridan with Catherine Baumgartner. For all of us here at the School of Public Policy, thanks so much for watching. Jeremy, thanks again so much for being here with us.
Thanks for
Have a
having me.
great day, everybody. Thank you.